It was a symbol. It represented the legacy of Canadian auto manufacturing, and it held the promise of its future. That promise was backed by billions of dollars, billions of your dollars. The Canadian federal and Ontario governments wagered heavily on the auto giant Stellantis, the parent company of Chrysler. They pushed billions in taxpayer money onto the table, a $3.6 billion deal in 2022 to retool plants, and a separate deal for a massive $15 billion in performance incentives for a new EV battery plant in Windsor. The goal was simple: secure the electric vehicle future for Canada. In exchange for this immense public investment, Stellantis made a legally binding commitment, a promise recorded in official agreements to maintain its entire automotive footprint in Canada, including the Brampton plant. That was the promise. Then came the reality. In March 2025, news broke that stunned Ottawa and devastated a community. While taking Canadian money, Stellantis announced a massive $13 billion investment, not in Canada, but in the United States. And the deepest cut? The company decided to move the production of the next-generation Jeep Compass, the very product slated to save the Brampton facility, out of Ontario entirely. It was being shipped to Belvedere, Illinois. For the 3,000 Canadian workers at the Brampton plant, this wasn't just a news headline, it was a betrayal. Is this just a cold business decision? Or is this a multi-billion-dollar bait and switch fueled by a geopolitical war far bigger than one factory? Tonight we are conducting an autopsy. This is the anatomy of a betrayal. To understand how this happened, you first have to understand the incredible pressure Canada is facing. This isn't a simple trade issue. This is a story of a loyal ally caught in a global vice grip, the geopolitical squeeze. Canada is in an impossible position. It is currently in an economic conflict with both of the world's largest economies at the exact same time. First, there is the confrontation with its biggest ally, the United States. In March 2025, the Trump administration unleashed its long-threatened America First weapon, a crippling 25% tariff on all cars and light trucks built outside of the United States. This wasn't a warning shot. This was a direct hit aimed at forcing automakers like Stellantis to bring production and jobs back to American soil. The policy was simple: build your cars in the U.S. or pay the price. This move sent shockwaves through the North American auto industry, threatening the very foundation of the USMCA trade partnership. But the pressure wasn't just coming from the South. Canada was also facing a battle from the East. To show solidarity with Washington, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government made a bold move. In October 2024, Ottawa announced it would impose its own 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles, citing unfair trade practices. Beijing's retaliation was swift, precise, and brutal. China targeted one of Canada's most vital industries, agriculture. In March 2025, China slapped a 100% tariff on Canadian canola oil and meal. Then in August, it hit even harder, imposing a 75.8% anti-dumping duty on raw canola seed. This wasn't a minor dispute. This was a direct attack on a $4.9 billion Canadian export market, threatening the livelihoods of thousands of farmers across the western provinces. This is the squeeze. Think about the impossible choice for Prime Minister Carney. He is trapped. He is trying to negotiate with Washington to save the auto jobs in Ontario from the 25% tariff. At the same time, he is in a trade war with Beijing that is sacrificing the farming jobs in the West. Canadian farmers are being sacrificed to protect the auto industry, but as we are about to see, that same auto industry was being sacrificed to its American ally. Canada was fighting a two-front war, and its own workers were becoming the collateral damage. The geopolitical pressure explains why Stellantis was looking south, but it doesn't explain how they could legally do it. How could a company accept billions in public subsidies and then simply walk away from its legal commitments? The answer lies in the fine print and a stunning act of corporate hardball. Anatomy of the betrayal. This is where the story moves from global politics to a direct, calculated betrayal. Let's follow the money. It wasn't just one deal. It was two massive taxpayer-funded packages. First, the deal for the future, the $15 billion Canadian dollar package in performance incentives for Stellantis to build a new EV battery plant in Windsor, Ontario. This was hailed as the anchor of Canada's new EV supply chain. Second, the deal for the present, a $3.6 billion Canadian dollar agreement in 2022 to retool Stellantis's existing assembly plants, including Brampton, for electric vehicle production. The Canadian government and the province of Ontario invested this public money based on one core, legally binding principle. I am quoting directly from government sources confirmed by CTV News. The funding was conditional on Stellantis maintaining its entire automotive footprint in Canada, including Brampton. It was a legal commitment, a promise. Now let's look at the timeline. While these Canadian subsidy checks were clearing, Stellantis was making other plans. The company announced a staggering $13 billion US dollar investment in its American facilities. More than 5,000 new jobs were announced for Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. The irony is agonizing. The very state receiving the Jeep Compass production, Illinois, is right across the border. Canada's subsidies intended to secure Canadian jobs were effectively helping to fund the company's expansion in the United States. When the news broke, the Canadian government was blindsided. They weren't just disappointed, they were furious. Canada's industry minister, Melanie Joly, sent an explosive letter to Stellantis. She called the company's decision entirely unacceptable. She accused them of breaking their binding agreements and threatened legal action, stating the government would use all tools to hold them accountable. Prime Minister Carney himself publicly admitted the move was a direct consequence of the 25% U.S. auto tariff, but the most powerful words didn't come from politicians. They came from the people who had built that company for generations. Unifor, the union representing the 3,000 workers at the Brampton plant, released a fiery statement. They called the move an egregious violation of their labor agreement. Their language was not diplomatic. They said Stellantis had betrayed the trust of its workforce, that the company's action was a black mark on its history. This wasn't just a broken contract. It was a violation of trust with the 3,000 families who had dedicated their lives to that factory. But behind the billions of dollars and the angry letters, there are real people. What does this geopolitical squeeze actually feel like on the ground? What happens to a community when it's told it is no longer useful? The human cost. For the 3,000 workers in Brampton, this is not a story about trade policy. It's a story about their future. It's a story about identity. Brampton is an auto town. Generations of families have worked at that plant. The jobs there aren't just paychecks. They are middle-class livelihoods. They are mortgages, college funds, and retirements. And for all of 2024, those 3,000 workers had been in a state of limbo. The plant was officially shut down for retooling to prepare for the exact product. The new Jeep Compass, that was just stolen from them. They were waiting in good faith. They were waiting for the new electric-ready assembly line that their government had just paid $3.6 billion for. And then they learned, through the media, that their future was being shipped to Illinois. The mayor of Brampton called it a punch to the gut, and that feeling is spreading. This decision creates a terrifying domino effect for the entire Ontario auto sector. If a legal agreement, backed by billions in public cash, can be broken this easily, what's to stop Ford from doing the same? What's to stop General Motors? The 25% U.S. tariff has fundamentally changed the math. It has made it more profitable for companies to abandon Canada, even if it means breaking legal promises. And it's not just the 3,000 jobs at the main plant. It's the hundreds of smaller, family-owned parts suppliers across Ontario that depend on that factory. It's the local restaurants that feed the workers. It's the entire economic ecosystem that is now at risk of collapse. This is the real lesson of the Stellantis betrayal. It's insight number 2 from our analysis. Government subsidies no longer buy corporate loyalty. Not when nationalist policies like America First are on the table. The $3.6 billion from Canadian taxpayers wasn't an investment. It was a gamble, and Canada lost. The money was taken, And the multinational corporations simply followed the bigger pile of money and the bigger political stick south of the border. It shows the terrifying powerlessness of a middle power nation when the giants it lives between decide to go to war. When we look at all the pieces, the picture is clear, and it is devastating. This brings us to the central thesis of our investigation. The Stellantis betrayal is not just a business decision, it is the first major casualty of a new and brutal economic world order. It proves that in a war between giants, the United States and China, loyal allies like Canada are not partners. They are collateral damage. The evidence is undeniable. Canadian farmers in the West are paying the price for the trade war with China. Their $4.9 billion canola market held hostage. And now, Canadian auto workers in the East are paying the price for the trade war with the United States. Their 3,000 jobs and the billions in subsidies that were supposed to protect them were sacrificed to the 25% America First tariff. The Canadian government is trapped, trying to put out both fires with taxpayer money and failing. This entire situation raises a fundamental question about our modern economy. When global companies use entire nations as pawns in their game, who is truly responsible for protecting the local worker? Is it the government that gives away billions in subsidies? Or is it the corporation that takes the money, breaks its promise, and leaves? Share your thoughts on the Stellantis decision in the comments. And this story doesn't end with Stellantis. The exact same geopolitical squeeze is now threatening Canada's farmers in that high-stakes trade battle over canola and Chinese EVs. To understand that critical story, make sure to watch our next video, which I've linked right here. If you value this kind of in-depth analysis that goes beyond the headlines, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.